On October 4, 2017, Nigerian forces and American Green Berets were ambushed by Islamic militants during an intelligence-gathering mission along the border with Mali. 50 fighters from an African affiliate of the Islamic State attacked with small arms, vehicle-mounted weapons, rockets-propelled grenades, and mortars. Roughly an hour into the firefight, American forces radioed in for assistance. French Mirage jets provided close air support and the militants disengaged. Helicopters arrived to take casualties back for medical assistance. When the battle ended, 4 Green Berets had been killed in the fighting and 2 others were wounded. Staff Sgt. Bryan Black, Staff Sgt. Jeremiah Johnson, Staff Sgt. Dustin Wright, and most publicized of all the fatalities, Sergeant La David Johnson were killed in action. President Trump engaged in a politicized confrontation with the widow of Johnson and Florida Representative Frederica Wilson over his words used in a consoling phone call. The political battle over President Trump's comments had the unintended effect of turning the nation's focus to American activities in Africa. Previously, the American public, and much of the political establishment, showed little interest in or knowledge of the missions conducted by the U.S. State and Defense Departments within developing African nations. On May 5, a Navy SEAL was killed near Mogadishu while assisting Somalian forces in fighting al-Shabaab. This death came over a month after the Trump administration lifted restrictions on counterterrorism operations in areas of Somalia. Neither event registered nearly as much mainstream attention as the controversy surrounding Sergeant Johnson. However, all reveal how Africa is slowly becoming an area of critical national interest for the United States. Issues surrounding African nations concerning both external and internal terror threats, as well as their economic woes, serve to ensure that U.S. policymakers will focus in on the continent. Global initiatives such as the Combined Joint Task Force for Operation Inherent Resolve involve several African nations critical to combating the rise of radical Islamic extremism. The rise of cohesive extremist groups coupled with the expansion of economic investment in post-colonial Africa has resulted in an increase in foreign and American military deployments to the region. In a Pentagon press conference on the ambush in Niger, Joseph Dunford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, revealed the United States had deployed troops in Niger for more than 20 years. Furthermore, the United States has troops stationed in 53 of the 54 countries in Africa. Troops stationed in Africa mostly fall under the administration of United States Africa Command, AFRICOM. The exception to this rule is the Arab Republic of Egypt, which falls under United States Central Command, CENTCOM. AFRICOM is the most important command structure for understanding the missions, activities, and roles of American troops deployed in Africa. Prior to 2008, American military operations in Africa were designated under United States European Command, EUCOM, and CENTCOM. The early 2000s saw several military officials call for an independent African command to handle the rise of Islamic extremism that had occurred in several African countries. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld recommended the creation of such a unified command to President George W. Bush in 2006. From 2007 to 2008, Rear Admiral Robert Moeller ran the AFRICOM transition team to design the structure of the new command. On October 1, 2008, AFRICOM was officially detached from EUCOM under the Command General William E. Ward. AFRICOM is headquartered in Kelly Barracks, Stuttgart, Germany, and employs 1,500 personnel working in logistics and command roles at Stuttgart. General Thomas D. Waldorzer from the United States Marine Corps serves as the 4th commander of AFRICOM. Waldorzer is tasked with constructing military capabilities in Africa, crisis response, elimination of threats to American interests in Africa, and promoting development. Somalia presented a dual problem to United States interests in Africa. the issue of the Somali civil war, al-Shabaab, and the influence of ISIS and al-Qaeda all present the United States with a need to work with African nations and exert its own power to counter extremism. Secondly, the rampant problem of Somali piracy threatens the freedom of oceanic commerce in one of the world's most important trade choke points. The Gulf of Aden sees around 20,000 ships pass through it each year carrying millions of tons of cargo, the majority of which passes through the Suez Canal. Both these factors made a U.S. base in Djibouti and the deployment of forces to the Horn of Africa vital. In countering terror groups in Somalia, the United States has utilized Special Operations Forces to engage in unconventional operations and assist the forces of the African Union and Ethiopia in training, intelligence, joint exercises, and advising. Typically raids by Navy SEALs or Delta Force are used to capture high-value targets, such as the Bara raid in 2009, killing Ali Sail al-Naban. In 2016, U.S. Special Operations Forces conducted a helicopter-based raid at Adhigel, 30 miles from Mogadishu. Targeting another important al-Shabaab official, both 15 terrorists and the target were killed. Offensive operations by the United States in Somalia are usually small-scale, backed by heavy plane and helicopter support, and target specific individuals. All precautions have been taken to avoid repeat of the disastrous 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, in which the United States lost 2 UH-60 Black Hawks with 19 killed and 73 wounded. In 2002, the United States expanded its Combined Maritime Force, CMF, from a unilateral group to an international coalition comprised of 26 nations. While including 3 task forces, only Combined Task Force 150 and Combined Task Force 151 operate off Africa. United States deployments to West Africa present the same support role as those exercised by counterparts in other areas of Africa, with the enhanced emphasis on large-scale training exercises. Countering extremist groups, mainly AFRICOM and Boko Haram, remains the priority of American forces. Rather than directly engage in raids and offensive operations, around 1,300 American advisors assist, train, and provide support infrastructure for partner nations. In 2013, 150 U.S. troops were deployed to Niger in support of anti-terrorism operations in Mali. In Niamey, a drone installation was constructed to provide aerial intelligence collecting capabilities. In 2017, 800 U.S. personnel have been deployed to Niger, and drones are being relocated to the air base at Agadez. Agreements with Niger only allow for surveillance drones, prohibiting the use of strikes targeting militants. Cameroon is another nation of interest in U.S. operations in West Africa. 300 troops were deployed in 2015, providing training, support, and intelligence roles. Cooperation has extended to the sharing of equipment, such as 6 military vehicles transferred to Cameroon's armed forces. Gua serves as another base for the United States to launch drones on intelligence missions in support of anti-insurgent operations. Training exercises provide a key tool in the improvement of the ability of African nations to counter insurgent groups. Flintlock has been an extensive special operations training mission to nations around the world in disaster relief, aid, medical, and combat operations. However, AFRICOM specializes in exercises specifically including African nations. The lack of any colonial possessions in Africa during the 19th and 20th century, coupled with focus on the Soviet Union in Europe during the Cold War, led to few involvements of the United States in Africa. Limited to supporting proxy forces in typical Cold War coups and civil wars perpetuated the instability that came to define African governments. However, in a world where the United States benefits both in economics and security from a stable Africa, its intentions have shifted to supporting these governments. It is this necessity to support, because of the rise of extremism in the 1990s and 2000s, that has led to greater involvement by the United States. Recently the United States has either been forced to, or has voluntarily yielded its authority on issues in the Middle East. The 2017 Astana talks ignored the United States in the peace process for the Syrian civil war, regardless of its leadership in Operation Inherent Resolve and support for the YPG in northern Syria. The Qatar crisis in June resulted in the United States meekly offering mediation on the issue rather than taking the initiative away from Saudi Arabia to ensure the continuation of anti-terror operations against the Islamic State. On October 15, 2017, Iraqi armed forces advanced on the Kurdish-held city of Kirkuk. Rather than demanding a withdrawal or taking an authoritative stance, the United States stayed neutral on the issue, urging a peaceful solution with a unified Iraq. Both developments instigate a resurgence of interest in Africa. Growing economic interest in the development of African infrastructure and industries, rising populations, and the threat of terrorist groups motivates the United States to pursue further activities in Africa. The expansion of exercises, war powers, and missions to Africa all show the keen interest the United States has shown in the continent. The Niger ambush pulled back the curtain on U.S. activities in Africa, and revealed to the ignorant political establishment the extent of U.S. operations. It can only be anticipated that as nations grow in both economic power and political stability, the United States will take more steps to align its interests and military deployments with the events in Africa.